Welcome to the Israel Insider weekly podcast, where we talk about the news in Israel with Ron Cantor, president of Shalanu TV and Israel regional director for God TV. I'm Lisa Hutchison. Thanks for joining us today. Well, Ron, I have been, in following the news there in Israel, I have been just really amazed at how the new foreign minister, Yair Lapid, he seems to have just taken off like a rocket in
Yeah.
his new tasks and duties. Would you care to share with the listeners, maybe fill them in, fill us all in a little bit? He's been quite busy.
Yeah, I think he's really hit the ground running, and I think this is, when he got into politics, he really wanted to do it differently. Going back to 2013, he really wanted to do it with integrity and really fight for the nation. As we know, people don't tend to have a whole lot of faith in politicians, and those who tend to get into politics with a pure heart, give them 5, 6, 10 years, and the ego takes over, and it's just hard to find politicians where it's not all about them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pleasantly surprised that he has remained uh, pretty straight,
Mm-hmm.
a man of integrity. And I think he's got a lot of pent up energy in the fact that he's been in the opposition, the leader of the opposition for years and years and years. And
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly he's the foreign minister, and he has hit the ground running. He I think he's in Dubai right now or on his way back.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he would be the first foreign minister of Israel to go to have an official visit to Dubai. Certainly the
Right.
first to open up an Israeli embassy, which is why he was there.
Right.
We now have an embassy in the United Arab Emirates, and he's already met with Anthony Blinken. They had made time for a meeting in Rome,
Right. And
and
he's also I think he's had some interactions with um pretty high level officials in Bahrain. Um
right.
he's really, yeah, he's just been moving and shaking. I mean, it's only been like what, a week and a half, 2 weeks
Well,
that
like we said a few weeks ago, the face of this government is not one man.
Mhm.
And I'm not even being critical of Netanyahu. I've never seen a government like this in Israel where you really do see a team mentality.
Mhm.
We had just yesterday 4 women uh, uh, cabinet leaders, the energy department, the environment department, 2 other departments. They got together and said our departments are going to work together to accomplish these goals.
Mhm.
It's just kind of unheard of
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
Israel politics. And
Yeah.
again, these all 4 of these women are leaders in other parties.
Wow.
None of them, I don't think, are in the same party.
Wow.
So there's an unusual level of cooperation in the new government.
Wow.
And while some people have really poo-pooed the idea that there is an Arab party involved, and again, I want to keep being clear: the Arab Party is not in the coalition. I even heard a Israeli journalist today talk about an Arab, the Ram Party being in the. They're not in the coalition. They voted for the coalition. They voted for the
Mhm.
government. That is not the same as being in the coalition. They enabled the coalition to form, and they are getting, certain favors. There's a huge wave of organized crime in many of the Arab cities, and one of the things that the leader of the Ram Party wanted was for Israel to crack down, to help them, to provide more police. And
Mhm.
so that is happening. We've just gone through a wave of murders just in the past week of
Wow.
organized crime. But getting back to the government, the face of this government is not merely Naftali Bennett. It's really called the Bennett Lapid government. And I have
Mhm.
been really impressed with Lapid. I certainly don't agree with him on everything, and I'm sure we'd find plenty to disagree on. But
Mhm.
the way he's carried himself, for instance, in Dubai this week, he thanked Netanyahu. He also thanked President Trump. And when he was asked later, why did you say something nice about Netanyahu? Because that's just not, that's rare in Israeli politics. And you're not going to find Bibi right now saying anything nice about Bennett or Lapid. In fact, he
Mhm.
is doing everything he can to bring down their government. And when Lapid was asked, why would you say something about this man who's treating you so horribly? He said, I'm so tired of the way we do politics in Israel. We've got to, I'm paraphrasing, we got to rise up higher and treat each other differently, and I'm trying to change the rhetoric. So he
Wow.
really seems to be going in this not for his own to build up his own name, but to help the country.
That's amazing. He definitely, I remember even from the start, I was just really impressed with, at least it what it appears is a great level of humility in him, at least in how he's approaching this. I don't know for sure that, that's really how he is as a human being or whatever, but in his approach with politics, the fact that, and again, it's how the coalition was formed, but that Bennett goes first and he's serving faithfully, it seems like, and with all
Yeah,
his might as the foreign minister. And when we were talking before the broadcast, you had just a great analogy, a biblical analogy of Yair Lapid and, with his predecessors and, how
right.
if you'd like to share that as well,
Sure.
that was
It
really
actually
great.
didn't come from me, just to be clear. It was the
Okay.
headline in one of the Israeli newspapers this morning.
Oh,
And
wow.
it basically said that Netanyahu and Lapid are like Moses and Joshua.
Hmm.
In other words, what they're saying is that when it comes to the Middle East and these peace deals that are being made, that Netanyahu brought us as far as he could bring us, but Lapid is now in the same way that Moses brought the Israelites as far as he could take them, and
Mm-hmm.
then Joshua took over. Now, obviously, all analogies have their weaknesses,
Yeah.
but I understand what they're trying to say is that
Yeah.
rather than Lapid undoing the success of Netanyahu, he's trying to build upon it and give Netanyahu credit, again, somebody who really doesn't like him and has treated
Mm-hmm.
him horribly.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's maybe a sign of good things to come.
Yeah. But by the way, also on the foreign ministry report, as we'll call it
Mhm.
right now,
Yes.
Honduras it became, I think, is it the fifth or the fourth?
4th.
The
Mhm.
fourth government to open up an embassy in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
So this is part of the legacy of President Trump, that he opened up the embassy in Jerusalem. There were some fears that Biden might want to move it back to Tel Aviv. I don't think that's happened. There's certain things, they become kind of they become the longer they go on, the harder it is to reverse. And I
Mhm.
think the American embassy is now forever in Jerusalem, and now you've got Honduras and a couple other countries as well. So the president of Honduras said, it's a unique day in our history. And this is a recognition from our people to the people of Israel. This is a day of commitment. So the next generation of Hondurans keep this embassy in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel.
Yeah.
And I know he said some nice words that caused me to think that he's probably a believer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
I noticed that he said he actually gave thanks to God in his
right,
remarks for allowing him. Kind of sounded like a little bit of an Esther moment, even though he's a gentleman. But he just said, for being a president at such a time as
right.
this, that he would be able to make this move with the Honduran embassy to Jerusalem. He was really grateful to be in the position he was in.
Amen.
Yeah, that's awesome. There's been a lot of other things happening with Israel on the international stage.
Hmm.
Outgoing President Rivlin, I have to say that slowly because
We
it's
call
a
him
bit of.
Ruby here, by the way.
Okay, nice. Everybody has a nickname over there, it
We got
seems.
Ruby. Our new president's name is Bougie. So,
Bougie. Okay. All righty then. President Rivlin, he met with U.S. President Joe Biden in the
right.
White House in the Oval Office. And for him, it's actually, I didn't realize this, but he has met with, this is the third president now. He met with Obama, President Obama,
Hmm.
President Trump, and now President Biden. And so anyway, they had some, it was supposed to be mostly ceremonial, but President Rivlin went in, wanting to make his point known, it seems,
Right.
especially with the hot topic of Iran and a nuclear
Hmm.
Iran. And what what are your thoughts on their visit and things that are happening with
Yeah.
Iran
Well,
right now?
the big headline is Biden pledging that he will never allow Iran to go nuclear on his watch.
Right.
The problem with that is we don't know how long his watch is going to be.
Yeah.
He's along in years. There's I think it's credible to have concerns about his cognitive skills.
Mhm.
He does seem like he has some difficulty at times getting words out or the right words out, or sometimes getting lost in thought. And then other times he actually appears normal. But
Mhm.
there's concerns there. We don't think he's gonna. I don't think he'll run again. He'll be in his 80s, probably I think 82, when in 2024.
Mhm.
So yeah, nobody expects Iran to get nukes in 4 years. That's not the concern. The concern is 10 years.
Mhm.
From the original, I think the original agreement back in 2015 was that it would be 10 years, and then which was that was what Israelis were so upset about. Is like all you're doing is you're just pushing off the inevitable rather than
Mhm.
stopping it.
Mhm.
So one thing Israeli politicians seem to be in agreement on, certainly in the center and on the right, which is the vast majority of our government,
Mhm.
you know, 80%, or rather 80 seats, so like 2/3 of our government, they all agree that we cannot let Iran get nukes.
Mhm.
And now Biden had been talking about having a stronger, longer agreement with Iran. That would certainly be better than a shorter, weaker agreement with Iran.
Yeah.
And so, but they don't seem to be talking about that much anymore. So there's real concern about that. And I think the approach of the Lapid foreign ministry as opposed to the Netanyahu approach. The Netanyahu approach was just to be critical, vocal,
Mhm.
outspoken against the plan. And I'm not saying that that was wrong. I'm right now just reporting. Lapid, I think his idea, and Bennett, is we are very much against it, but let's talk to our friends, the Americans. Let's
Mhm.
sit down with them. Let's make sure that we're friends, and hopefully as friends they'll listen to us, they'll listen to our concerns. Rather, now many will recall Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe the boldest thing I've ever seen in my lifetime, going into the United States Congress. Now he had quite a bit of allies there in the Republican Party, but pretty much speaking for about an hour and a half against Obama and against the Iran nuclear deal.
Mhm.
um, I don't
With lo-
think the Bennett strategy is that. And that didn't
right.
work. It did
Right.
not stop the deal. What stopped the deal was President Trump coming in and saying this is ridiculous, and
Mhm.
good for him. Presently, we have no deal with them, and they seem to be continuing in their aspiration for nukes, and there are severe sanctions on Iran. Now, here's my concern, Lisa. I don't know how you can make any deal with Iran and still not acknowledge that they are the primary reason for tension, murderous tension in the Middle East.
Mhm.
They are funding, they're behind Syria. They fund Hezbollah, which has killed, God knows how many people. The rebels in Yemen they're behind, and they help Hamas. I mean,
Mhm.
they are a state sponsor of terrorism. And what Biden has to understand, and I don't understand that they don't understand it. It's mind-boggling, is that the money that you allow them to get by lifting sanctions, they are not going to use to build their economy. They're not going to use to help their people. They are Islamic fundamentalist. Their goal is to take over the Middle East and then the world. Now, they're never going
Mhm.
to do that, but in the meantime, they can cause a lot of instability here in the Middle East. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that these Arab nations make peace with Israel. They
Mhm.
recognize that and this brings us to another story. I'll just hit on it right now since we're done with the Iran story. Uh, is they want our technology. They
Right.
understand that we are the startup nation, and we've got the weapons, and we've got the technology and the know-how. We know how to fight terrorism. And I was sharing with you this morning, Lisa, how Hamas has unwittingly really been a blessing to Israel. I
Yeah.
know that sounds crazy, but without Hamas, we would never have invented the Iron Dome. And that technology is going to make Israel a lot of money. And it's
Mhm.
causing Arab nations to want to be our friend. And now you wrote in an article this week about the Jaguar,
Right.
a
The
new
new
robotic. Go ahead,
Mhm.
tell us
Yeah,
what
the
it
new
is.
yeah, it's a new robot, basically a robotic vehicle that's going to patrol along the Gaza border, and it looks like the Mars lander to me. I mean, it's pretty crazy. The rover, I think it was called. But anyway, it's awesome. It's equipped with a machine gun. It has all sorts of sensors, and it's amazing
And it's
because
going to save lives. It'll
it's going to
save
save lives.
our soldiers'
Exactly.
lives.
Yep. And so with that, I think it's so interesting to understand how the Abraham Accords and the technology and all of these things, they all are working together
Right,
in a different fashion, because as far as like for Israel's defense and for the betterment of the Middle East and the people there, because
right,
of the thing to remember is that Iran also, in their um, quest for power, they're looking at, they cause trouble in other parts of the Middle East, like you were mentioning those other places. It's not all just aimed at
right,
Israel. It's far reaching, and so those nations also are looking for a way to keep Iran from becoming a nuclear power.
right.
And
And Hamas has unwittingly helped us create
yeah,
these technologies that are
yeah,
bringing peace to the Middle East. I mean, that's
yeah,
crazy. Well, I
yeah,
didn't really. I just thought about that this morning. Like,
yeah,
without Hamas, we might not have peace with the UAE and
yeah,
Bahrain and Morocco and these other nations that are Sudan lining up to be our friend.
yeah.
We have something to offer, and they just realize it's not in their best interest to not be friends with Israel. And by the way, for everyone who believes the nonsense that we are a inherently racist nation, that Zionism is racism, and all these ridiculous things like that, why is it then that the minute Arab nations want to make peace with us, we're like, yeah, yes, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
we want to,
Yeah.
so
Like that was one of the things that Yair Lapid said at the opening of the embassy in the UAE. He was saying, he was like, we're here in the Middle East. We're here to stay. Come talk to us, other
right,
nations, come talk to us. We want to, have peace. We want to
right,
be,
and you think about that conversely, Lisa, with the Palestinians. We go to them and hey, let's make peace. No, no, we're
mm-hmm,
going to give you half of Jerusalem. No, not enough. We want this. We want that. We want. They're choosing terrorism over peace. They're
mm-hmm,
choosing murder over peace. They celebrate suicide bombers. So you've got one party that is looking to make peace with all these people, and I really, I've said this before, so I will move on quickly. But I'm convinced that many of these nations got tired of waiting on the Palestinians. I think they
mm-hmm.
became convinced that they don't. And when I say Palestinians, I mean the leadership. I
Right,
mean the Palestinian Authority.
right.
They prefer to not have peace, to not have to govern a whole nation, and so there you have it.
Yeah. And when you were talking about, one of the issues that's thrown out there is the racism issue, which though, that also can tie into something else I've heard you talk about, that's nationalism
Yeah,
versus patriotism. And then that whole issue, one thing that's also an article that we have this week is about what's happening in Poland.
yeah,
And there's a lot of Polish nationalistic fervor that
yeah.
is really into denying the Holocaust, and
Right.
which is so astonishing. But anyway, maybe share a little
Well,
bit with
their
yeah.
nationalism is rooted in shame.
Mm,
And then there are two ways to kind of deal with that. One is to, you meet with your psychologist and you deal with your yucky things that you did in the past, and
mm-hmm,
you get some sort of healing and you move on. You move on from your shame. That's the recommended way. That's the healthy way.
mm-hmm,
Another way to deal with shame, uh, and we see this with, and I'm being silly, but I'm also being very honest, or serious. You see this with pedophiles.
mm,
They have cravings and urges. They give into those urges, but then they don't want to admit that they actually, and then they blame the victim.
mm,
It's your fault. You made me do it, or it never happened. You're making up stories, and so that's really what you have in Poland right now. Is you have a government that is very nationalistic, and again, it's not wanting to admit that they committed atrocities during the Holocaust.
mm-hmm,
So what is happening is there's a new law in uh, Poland, And this comes on the heels of a few years ago where they passed a law that made it, I think it made it illegal inside of Poland to say that Poland was guilty of, crimes in the Holocaust, something
Right.
something
Right.
akin to that.
Right.
And this new law puts a 10 to 30-year limit on the time Jews have to contest past decisions on restitution. So we're talking about whose homes were taken from them, which happened a lot in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
And so what Poland is saying, no, 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 no. We were victims of German aggression. We were victims of German racism, which, by the way, is true. They
Mm-hmm.
were victims. They were invaded by Poland. Um, and the Poles suffered, and many Poles fought heroically in the resistance. Many
Mm-hmm.
Poles protected Jews, but let's not ignore history.
Mm-hmm.
The, the fact of the matter is, many Poles were involved in turning Jews over to the Nazis. Many Poles were involved in extorting Jews. Give me 20,000 dollars, or I forget how it was, zloty, I think is what they call
Zloty.
them. Yeah,
Zloty. Yeah.
zloty.
Zloty.
Or we're going to turn you in to the Nazis, and then often they might get the money and then still turn them in because
Mm.
they've got nothing to lose. And it was very common for people to turn people in and then take over their homes.
Mm.
Um, there was a 20,000 member police force made up entirely of Poles that guarded the ghettos where they kept the Jews locked in and day out. So yes, we do recognize that the Poles were victim, but let's not ignore the fact that there were many people in Poland that became willing participants, either by opportunity or fear. Just be honest. So our government is not very happy with that, and we've come out and made some pretty strong statements. Yair Lapid, who wrote an amazing book called I think it's called Stories from My Father, which one of
Mm-hmm.
the best books I've ever read. He wrote his dad's autobiography, but it's his dad's voice, but
Wow.
he's writing it, and it was after his
Wow.
father passed away. But his dad was a survivor. He was a young kid in
Mm-hmm.
Budapest, Hungary. His mother hid him from the Nazis, and somehow they survived. But he says, Lapid, so you can imagine that it's very dear to his heart. He said, no law will change history. It's a disgrace, and it will not erase the horrors of the memory of the Holocaust. The Prime Minister of Poland should check the facts again. Millions of Jews were killed on Polish soil. By the way, 3 million Polish Jews died, the largest
Mm-hmm.
uh, Jewish population to die in any country during the Holocaust.
Wow.
And no legislation will erase their memory. We're not interested in Polish money, and hinting at such is anti Semitic.
Yeah. Wow. That I think, it's one of those where again, in the whole world, in the atmosphere, anti-Semitism has just really increased, and this is just it on a national level. I
Yeah.
mean, and the reason I was reading about the reason that 10 to 30-year window is also so critical is because for the first, World War II ended over 70 years ago, but communism the communist regime took over in
Right.
Poland until the late 1980s. So really, there's only been about 30 years to, really try to make things right, and it it is now that they're looking to pass this law that would shut that window
Right.
completely. And
Yeah, and my heart does go out to them. I mean, you mentioned it, that they went from being under Nazi control to
mm-hmm,
being under Soviet control.
mm-hmm,
And they were in that situation until, I guess, the late 80s. So they've had a rough go at it, but the way to deal with the shame is not to deny what happened and what they did. I mean, the last time I checked, there's only a few hundred Jewish people living in Poland today.
mm-hmm.
There was once, 3
Millions.
million.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that tells you something.
Yeah. Well,
Well, more than 3 million.
yeah.
Many of them immigrated after the Holocaust.
Yeah. That's a yeah. And it's, like a lot of things, so many things in life and in history, it's complicated. But,
Yeah.
there is truth and there is the right way. And So with that, there was one other thing that we wanted to just touch on here at the end of the podcast, and that is everybody's favorite topic, COVID. What's
Mm.
happening? Just kidding, tongue in cheek. What is happening with COVID and with coronavirus there in Israel? There was a slight uptick last week when we last spoke about this. What's happening now?
Yeah. Okay. It's really hard to get super accurate information. I don't know why. My biggest question is, so well. Let me just back up. We're experiencing an uptick. We're up to 300 cases a day. We were down to 6 cases a day,
Wow.
and at that point, and that was 2 weeks ago, uh, on June 15th, they got rid of the mask mandate nationwide. Turns out that
Mm-hmm.
was a bit too soon because there was immediately an uptick in coronavirus vaccination infections.
Right.
What I am still unable to find out is how many vaccinated people, percentage wise, are getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what I am pretty sure of. Right now, even with 300 new cases a day, there's only 29 people in the hospital, or 20, yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think it's 29 hospitalized or in serious condition.
Mm-hmm.
So, what it's telling me is that even if people who are vaccinated are getting it, the severity of it is much less than what it was
Mm-hmm.
back, say, a year ago,
Mm-hmm.
where our hospitals literally were overrun. I remember my daughter needed to go to the emergency room back in think it was May or June
Mm-hmm.
of last year, or no, it was in the middle of summer when things were really bad, and we went there. I couldn't go in because they were limiting who could go in, and she came back out to the car and she said they told her that she was safer to deal with what I can't remember what the issue was she was dealing with. Safer to deal with it on her own than to come into the hospital
Wow.
for a long period of time. So,
Wow.
and
Wow.
so what we have to be careful of right now is, as a country, we can't overreact.
Mm-hmm.
We would never shut down the economy if 27 people were hospitalized for some other communicative disease.
Mm-hmm.
27 people out of 9 million is not worth hurting the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, there's smarter people than me in that are overseeing this. So I don't think they're going to do that. Of course, we do, and that's one of the reasons, by the way, we're postponing opening up a new tour because we just don't. I don't want to get people's hopes up and have them make plans, take off work, buy tickets, and then we have to cancel it. I'm
Yeah.
waiting until we know that we know. But they did say that in a week they may consider shutting down the airport again to keep out more infected people coming from other nations. Right now, there are certain nations that are blacklisted that you cannot go to,
Mm-hmm.
and if you do, you'll be fined. Is it $5,000 or 5,000
No,
shekels?
shekels. Yeah.
Shekels,
5,000
5,000
shekels.
shekels. So
Mm-hmm.
that's about $1,500.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Turkey, if you go to Russia, you're going to come back and pay a hefty fine. Certainly, if you go to India, you're going to come back and pay that hefty fine. And so that's where we're at today. It's in the news, but it's really not that big of a deal right now. We'll have to see where it is a week from now. They expect in a week to get up to 500 to 600 new infections a day. And
Mm-hmm.
again, as long that is not the number that we really need to be looking at. We need to be looking at hospitalizations and deaths.
Mm-hmm.
And we've only, I think this is accurate. I think we've only had one death from corona
Yeah.
in a while.
Yeah, that's what
So
I had read that too. Yeah. So whatever this wave is, it's either from folks being vaccinated, it's not as deadly and serious. It doesn't go to that point or whatever it is. So that's really good news that it's not getting to the extremes again. It definitely needs to be monitored, it sounds like, but not like, complete shutdown again, like how it was last year. So that's good news. And maybe, with the tours, once things roll for, a month or two or three, and they're, consistently, not having these little waves come in and whatever, maybe we'll be able, y'all be able to make some plans from there. So everybody
hope
just,
so.
yeah, stay tuned and we'll keep you apprised of that. Um, thank you, Ron, for another great podcast. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to give it a review wherever you are listening. We are on all the major platforms. Please be sure to follow the Israel Insider on Facebook and sign up for our daily email to get the inside scoop on happenings in the Holy Land. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.